Hello, good afternoon from Tel Aviv. I apologize for the delay. We've had technical difficulties, but I hope the program will be worth it. I'm Dr. Shira Efron. I'm a senior researcher and head of the Climate Change and National Security Research Program at the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS. And I'm a co-chair of the subgroup on regional cooperation, working under the auspices of the Israeli President's Climate Forum. Thank you all for joining us. And again, apologies for the delay. This is a really special event, one of a kind. I hope we'll have more, which INSS is hosting in partnership with the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with Mitvim Institute, and with the President's Israeli Climate Forum. We have a rich program, really many excellent speakers, and not such a long time. So I'll quickly go over the plan so you know what we're in for. We will hear opening remarks from two speakers. We're hoping to have the third join us just through we have technical issues connecting our Israeli ambassador in Cairo. So we will start with three speakers who will open. We'll subsequently move on to the first session, which will examine mostly the problems. How does climate change manifest itself in the Middle East? The second session will examine the potential for regional collaboration and the ability of all of us collectively to mitigate some of these risks. And I hope we can start a discussion. Also, we encourage your questions throughout the program. You can raise your virtual program at the bottom of your screen, or just type your questions in the chat function or the Q&A function. I assume many of you have done Zoom webinars before, so you know already how to do this, and we really encourage your questions. Our speakers have vast experiences, but in the interest of time, I'll just read their top line bios, but I encourage you to follow their important work. I'll introduce all of them together by session in the order of their speaking. So for opening remarks, I will invite Major General Tamir Heyman, Major General Reserves. He's Managing Director of INSS, my boss. Recently completed 34 years of service in the IDF in many interesting and important roles, most recently as the head of the Intelligence Directorate. I hope she's with us, if not able to speak, at least in her partnership and leadership in this, is Ambassador Amira Aron, Israeli ambassador to Cairo, the first female ambassador in this role ever. And with rich experience in the Middle East and across the world as a diplomat. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dov Hanin, who is the chairman of the President's Israeli Climate Forum. He's a former politician, a political scientist, and a legal expert who served in the Knesset as a member of the Joint List. So please, Tamir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shira. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity and the privilege to open this very important webinar. I'm looking forward to hearing various very important people that I see in front of me. And I consider climate change as one of the top prioritized mission tasks of the INSS. The issue of climate change and that of its influence on national security issues is long noticed, but real deep research studies and observing the situation in practical manner doesn't really exist in a form of staff work in the IDF or in other establishment in the security organization of Israel, because our plate is so full. We have such huge and dramatic events happening constantly, and it usually being postponed to the next year and next year and next year. But I think there is a huge graffiti in Tel Aviv which says the climate crisis is already here, and I consider it to be true. It's something that happened in the past, and each time it happened, it was a huge security crisis involved of food security problems, energy security problems, water and basic needs. And now in our modern times, there are more practical operational issues that are very sensitive to issues of climate change. So on the operational level, we should discuss and analyze the influence, and on the strategic level, as sort of island in a very desert environment surrounding in the Middle East. It should take to notice what the potential of international cooperation and how is the normalization trend or block is going to be of service or help in order to tackle that as a group of nations, not everyone by itself. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to learn a lot. Back to you.
Thanks, Tamir. Again, I don't think we were able to connect Ambassador Amira Aron. Oh, we have Amira. Hallelujah. Wonderful. Ambassador Aron, please welcome, and the floor is yours. Here. You should just unmute yourself. Here. Okay.
Muted again. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I apologize. You're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Ambassador Aron, you're on mute. Here, that's good. Keep it. Here, please.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you, Shira. Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. I wish to greet our guests and followers, the Arabic speakers. Masa al-khair wa marhaba bikum. I wish to thank my partner, Dr. Ophir Winter, and the INSS, of course, my colleagues from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, for sharing the idea of producing this webinar, which hosts the Israeli experts on climate change and its implications. We wish to join hands and to share the expertise of academicians and officials in the Middle East, so we will all be better prepared for the biggest challenge mankind has ever witnessed. There are two facts which make our agenda facing this challenge more practical and urgent. One is the fact that we all know that the Middle East will be a hotspot, meaning it will be more affected by the climate change. For example, we know that the average temperature has increased here by 1.4 degrees Celsius compared to the global average, which is 1.1 degrees. The second thing, of course, as we all are getting prepared for, is the COP27, which will be hosted by Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh on November 6th. I think this is an important event for all of us, the inhabitants of this region, to work together in order to reach practical solutions. Due to the understanding of the implications on the Middle East, Egypt attaches a huge importance to this event and invests much effort in preparation towards it. The steps taken by Egypt in that regard are part of the national climate strategy and the major economic development Egypt is witnessing the last few years, while shifting towards a green and sustainable economy and preserving natural resources. And if I may, I would like to mention a few examples. Egypt inaugurated a national hydrogen strategy to encourage the production and the use of this low emission energy. It also made progress in increasing the share of renewable energy in the energy mix to reach 35% by 2035 by implementing projects such as the very well-known Benban, the world's largest solar park near Aswan, electric mobility projects such as the monorail and speed trains. Egypt also increased the percentage of green projects in the investment plan and issued green bonds as the first country in the Middle East. The city of Sharm el-Sheikh itself, as I witnessed last week, is going through an impressive infrastructure development process to be able to host all the delegations and the guests which will attend the COP27. Steps are being taken also to transform it into a green city, for example, using more solar panels or introducing electrical buses which will shuttle the guests. There are two key goals out of the 5 composing the Egyptian climate change strategy. I would like, as I mentioned earlier, that I think can promote cooperation between Israel and Egypt and regionally as well. One talks about building resilience and adaptability to climate change, and the second signifies the importance of scientific research and technology transfer. For our region, one of the immediate challenges will be growing more food by increasing cultivated area under the limitations of climate change impact, such as water scarcity, adaptations of seeds and agriculture protocols suitable for extreme hot weather conditions and times of drought. We are all facing now the implications of the war against Ukraine related to the supply of wheat. So by building a holistic cooperation between us, we will be able to give answers to these acute challenges, because every crisis is an opportunity, of course. We can formulate together cooperation strategies and projects while gathering the scientists, officials, the private sector, and the civil society of our region. Before concluding, I would like to take this opportunity to greet our viewers and partners for Eid al-Adha al-Mubarak, to greet Egypt for a fruitful and successful conference, and to thank the speakers of the webinar for sharing their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. And you started touching on the points that we're gonna talk in the webinar. Let's move to Dr. Hanin, please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm very glad to be here, and I would like to begin with thanking all the partners in this very important webinar: the INSS, Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Israeli Embassy in Cairo, Tel Aviv University, Mitvim Institute, Ecopeace, Arava Institute, the Good Food Institute. Regional cooperation is very central in the work of the Israeli Climate Forum and in the vision of President Herzog, who initiated the Israeli Climate Forum. John Donne has written, "No man is an island, and no country can stand alone facing climate crisis." The whole idea of an oasis in the desert is a very dangerous illusion. It is either we stand together or we shall perish together. I want to briefly refer to the relationship between climate crisis and the bitter national conflict we have in our region. We should avoid two mistakes here. The first mistake is very familiar to all of us. It is concentrating on the national conflict while practically ignoring climate crisis. Well, this is exactly like continuing to quarrel on a room on the Titanic hours before it hits the iceberg. The second mistake is ignoring the national conflict while trying to concentrate only in climate issues. Well, this will not work. As history has repeatedly showed us, one cannot just put the conflict in a box and decide to ignore it. The box will explode in the most inappropriate minute. Therefore, in the very dramatic reality of the 21st century, we have to find ways to combine the two issues and to view them together. Climate crisis does change everything, including our beliefs and our positions on the national issue. In order to be able to face climate crisis together, in order to meet this huge challenge of the 21st century, we should find ways to overcome and solve the conflicts of the 20th century. Seeing the national issues through the lenses of climate crisis, through the lenses of the reality of our times, can help us all to see clearly both the challenge and the opportunities existing here. I wish you all a very, very interesting webinar.
Thank you very much, Dov. And before we start the second part of the program, just for our viewers, we have a simultaneous translation into Arabic. So if you would like to listen to the program in Arabic, you can select your language in the Zoom preferences under the interpretation function. That is at the bottom, you see this little earth. Under the interpretation function, you can choose the language and then you can listen either in English or in Arabic. So without further ado, let's turn to our first session, the implications of climate change for the Middle East and North Africa, what we call the MENA region. Again, we have three terrific speakers who I'll again present briefly just in the order of their speaking. And we will begin with Professor Colin Price, Professor in Atmospheric Sciences and Head of the Climate Change Initiative at Tel Aviv University, right next door. And then we will transition to Ambassador Gideon Bechal, Special Envoy for Climate Change and Sustainability within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we'll speak with Dr. Nurit Gal, an energy expert who was Deputy Chair of the Israeli Electricity Authority with long career also in the IDF. Again, we encourage your questions either in the chat function or you could just raise your virtual hand. So Professor Price, I want to start with you just to set the stage really. And Ambassador Aron did say that the Middle East, the MENA region is a climate hotspot, but what does it mean? How is climate change manifested in this region? Why is this considered a hotspot? I mean, it's July and it's really hot, but what are we talking about really? And if you can give us sort of a taste of what the future is going to look like, please.
Okay, thanks, Shira. Well, I think I was second on the list to speak, but I'd be happy to start to present. So basically, if we talk about climate change and the climate crisis, I often like to compare the planet to the person's body the Earth has a fever. Basically, the Earth has a fever now, and in the Middle East area, the fever is even higher than the global fever. And if you compare it to the fever that our kids or grandkids have, it's much more severe, actually, than a fever that a person has, because the average body temperature is 37 degrees, where the Earth's temperature is 15 degrees. So at the moment, we have got a fever of about 1 degree, 1.1 degree globally, 1.4 we heard from Amira in this region. And the predictions are that by the end of the century, if we don't do anything, it could be up to 3 or 4 degree fever. And we know what that'll do to a person. If you have a fever of 4 degrees, you may be dead. So the planet's not going to die, but it's going to be a fairly unpleasant place to live if we get to 4 degrees warming by the end of the century. And the same as we have symptoms when we're sick, the Earth is showing symptoms, and that's basically increasing temperatures. And we're seeing in our part of the world that the summer temperatures are actually increasing much faster than the winter temperatures. Our summers are getting much hotter and more rapidly than the winters. Our summers are getting longer in the Middle East. We're seeing much higher maximum temperatures, breaking records every year. And so this has direct impacts, obviously, on public health, on industry, on any activity we do outside. In some places in the Middle East, we won't be able to do anything outside when the temperature is 50 degrees in the shade. And not only is the temperature a problem, but this can lead also to fires in places that we have vegetation, including in Israel. The fires are normally man-made, but the intensity of the fires are related to the climate and the dryness of the vegetation. And we see this also in Israel in 2010, 2016, and recently. The intensity of the fires that we're having are dramatic, and basically it's very difficult to stop them once they start. So the temperature is the one thing that we feel, and that's one of the symptoms of the heat waves, which can result in drought, obviously direct impacts on agriculture in the region. Rainfall is also changing and is expected to continue to change. In our region and the whole Mediterranean, we can expect by the end of the century about a 20% decrease in rainfall if we don't do anything. And we're already seeing in the Middle East and in large parts of the Mediterranean, Greece, India, Italy, Spain, dramatic decreases in rainfall. But when the rain does come, it comes much more violently and comes in downpours, which either wash off to the sea, so we can't store this water, but also cause flooding in our cities, and we've seen recently, in recent years, some severe urban flooding, both in Tel Aviv and in Nahariya, where people have been killed, trapped in elevators. But at the end of the season, we're left with less water. And so we have less water to deal with for agriculture, for water resources. But when it does come, it's much more violent, producing flooding and also causing erosion and removing topsoil in agricultural regions. The final parameter that's changing and will change, predicted by all the models, is sea level rise. And both sea level rise is caused by warming of the oceans. Warmer waters take up larger volumes, but also the melting of the ice sheets. The main ice sheets are on Antarctica and Greenland. And the predictions here are by end of the century, we'll have 1 meter rise in sea level. And just to put that in context, today in the Nile Delta in Egypt, there are more than 6 million people that live in 1 meter of sea level. That will probably double in the next 30 years. So by 2050, there'll be 12 million people, if not more, within 1 meter of sea level. The sea level won't rise overnight, but this means we're going to have to move people. There's going to be lots of migration. They're going to have to find new places to live. Cities like Alexandria, Port Said will be underwater if this continues, this trend, which will also result in a huge amount of climate refugees in our region, not just from the Middle East, but also from Africa. So if we don't do anything, the future looks pretty dire. It's not going to be a nice place to live. But as we hear often, these problems also bring a lot of opportunities, and opportunities in energy, renewable energies, different ways of growing our food, agriculture, water resources, also for public health, how we deal with public health issues. And just last night, I was at a meeting with Tarek and with the group from Oxford, who have also system analysis models, which we may hear about this in the next session. But from all the studies, it shows that if we cooperate together in this region, if we cooperate in the Middle East to try to solve these problems, first of all, we will reach the solutions much quicker, and it will be a lot cheaper. So we will have two benefits here. Firstly, we can reach our goals of reducing our carbon footprint much faster and at a much lower cost if we cooperate on a regional basis. If everyone does it alone, it will take much longer and be much more expensive. I'll end there.
Thank you, Colin. We'll definitely get to these points, and we know the barriers for collaboration are not necessarily technical, they're political, especially in this region. But because you were so disciplined with time, I just wanted to ask 2 very quick follow-up. You know, often people say like, oh, it's 1 degree higher or even 4 degrees higher. What's the big deal? You know, I'll just turn the AC a little bit lower and I'll solve this problem. So maybe, you know, just the sort of the framing in terms of the extremes, which is kind of, and sort of, and just the second one, which you haven't pointed out, we are seeing a growing frequency and intensity of dust and sandstorms. There's been, I think, close to 8 storms in Iraq in the last couple of months, which affect the whole region. So you can just say 2 words about both of these points.
Okay, so first of all, you're right. We basically talk only about the mean temperature going up by 1 or 2 degrees. And most people think that's not a big deal because night, day, summer, winter, we have much bigger changes in temperature. But when you look at the mean, there's a distribution about the mean, and you have tails to the distribution. You have very cold days, very hot days, very dry days, very wet days. And when you shift the mean by just a few degrees, you have a dramatic increase in the very hot days and the extreme hot days that you haven't seen before. And those are the days which we're worrying about. And to give you an example, 2003, the heat wave in Europe in 2003, the temperature was about 5 degrees warmer than normal, the mean temperature. And that was still only about 23 degrees in Europe, the average temperature. But that 5 degrees resulted in such a change relative to normal that more than 70,000 people died within a 10-day period in Europe. And we know that because we can compare that to the same period, the same 10 days the year before and the year afterwards. And the delta is 70,000 people. So a small shift in the mean has a huge increase in the extremes of the distribution. And that's what we see impacting both, whether it's flooding, temperature, rainfall, all the other parameters that we're talking about. Regarding the dust storms, well, obviously, as the temperatures go up, as we're having less rainfall, We also have a growth in population and overgrazing and other issues not directly linked to the climate. Obviously, the land is getting drier, less vegetation to hold down the sand and the dust. And so when we do have storms and we do have strong winds, this gets lifted up into the atmosphere, and we're going to have more dust storms as well as we go into the future. So they're all linked together. Warmer temperatures, less rainfall, less vegetation, all of these promote increased dust storms in the future.
Thank you very much. We'll turn back to you. I hope we'll have a second round. Ambassador Bahar, the story of climate change is also a story of human security, a story of national security. We talk about climate change as a threat multiplier, something that exacerbates socioeconomic, ethnic tensions. We have many of these in the region. And also, as Major General Heyman spoke about, affecting capabilities, defense forces, border security, all of that. Can you put a little bit, I don't know if this is the expression in a climate change conference, but a little meat on the bone on what the national security implications of climate change, what are they in our region?
Thank you very much, Shira. Shukran wa assalamu alaikum min al-Quds. I think that what Professor Price has described is really a very sober reality in which we are already in, or we are already facing it, and we will see more of that in the future unless we take immediate action. Now, we know that climate change is a threats multiplier. It means that it multiplies threats that already exist, either security threats, either threats to the economy, to stability, to livelihood, to agriculture, etc. And especially in our region, which is already a very fragile region, already infected by wars, instability, civil wars, terrorism, big diversity between people, the ramifications of climate change are already felt and will be much more felt in the future, regarding stability of in the region as a whole, but also for nation states. An example, a very good example, is the civil war in Syria, which broke out in 2010. Now, not many people know it, but in the years previous to the war, Syria suffered a lot from a very severe drought. A drought that forced more than 1.5 million of people to become displaced persons in their own country. Hundreds upon hundreds of villages were abandoned because of lack of rain, lack of agricultural activities, and people moved in the cities. And combined with lack of sufficient reaction by the regime, helped or gave a hand to the Arab Spring that broke out and the civil war in Syria. So in our region, climate change is indeed a factor that we must consider when it comes to security and stability in the region. Now, I would like to say something furthermore. Most people consider security as something which is affecting them from their immediate surrounding, okay, a neighboring state or maximum a country which is not far away from you. But climate change makes everything different. Events that happen thousands of kilometers away from us have direct effect on our security. And again, the Middle East felt this already in 2010, when droughts in the big wheat suppliers of the world brought about a rise in prices of commodities, especially grains and wheat, which also contributed to instability in the region, to demonstrations, to riots, to uprising against regimes and governments in the region. So we have to think not only about what's going on in the Middle East, but also on the broader scale of events Another example is sea level rise. We know that the biggest potential for sea level rise is coming from Antarctica, which is really very far away, and no one has it in his mental map. But the possibility of a rise of even few meters, sea level rise of even a few meters per decade or few years is becoming more and more possible. And this will have a dramatic effect on the stability on the region. So other effects that can have negative ramifications in the Middle East caused by climate change are also immigration or migration. We see already how thousands upon thousands of people in the Middle East are abandoning their agricultural lands, either in Syria or Iraq, because of drought, because of lack of water. So people are already moving, and climate immigration or migration in the Middle East has already started. And in the future, we will see even more immigration coming outside from the region, from maybe Africa or other parts of Asia, and this will all contribute to the instability of the region. So if we look also on the effects of climate change on agriculture, on economy, on countries that their economy is based to a large extent on oil, and we know that there will be an energy transition, and unless countries that are dependent on oil will be able to do the transition to renewable, we know that it will affect their economy and the consequences also their stability. So looking at the picture in the Middle East, we understand that in order to avoid the most severe effects of climate change in the Middle East, we must cooperate together, and we must build what I call, and we call, climate resilience, or regional climate resilience to climate change. The region as a whole must be resilient to climate change. Not, and Dov Hanin said it before, not even country in the region will be able to face climate change by itself. So the resilience and adaptation must be made collectively in the region by all partners and all countries in the region. And we see already the beginning of regional cooperation. From my position, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is involved in many of these collaborations, initiatives, and I do have hope that we will move into this direction. I will just mention two initiatives. One is the Cypriot Initiative for Climate Change in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, which is advancing very well with already high-level meetings, and it is gaining momentum, and we have to help it. Another initiative which started with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is what we call 3+1, and this is an initiative to combat climate change shared by Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and the United States, and this forms also another possibility of regional cooperation. Abraham Accords and the Negev Summit, which brought together 6 countries, 5 from the region and the United States, form more possibilities for regional cooperation and resilience building as a whole for climate change. So I just finish my remarks by saying that we have to put an alternative vision on the table. We know which direction we are going, and Colin and Dov have described it, but we can create an alternative future, and the alternative future needs to be based on a different vision, on a new vision, and this vision is a vision of regional cooperation on climate change and a vision based on regional resilience and strength in face of climate change. So thank you very much, and shukran jazilan.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bahar, and we will get to the regional cooperation more in the next time or next panel, or if we have more time, we'll get back to this. But I appreciate you bringing up two important initiatives. Dr. Gal, I want to turn to you. You know, the world and the region, some countries in the region, Israel has made a commitment in Paris and then in Glasgow, not that long ago, to transition away from fossil fuels toward renewable energies. And then the war in Ukraine happens. And we see setbacks. We see a country like Germany going back to operating coal plants. So can you, and Ambassador Bahar did mention, you know, countries that are dependent on fossil fuels. And how do sort of the global calls for mitigating emissions on the one hand, and a situation like the war in Ukraine on the other hand, affect energy markets and stability that comes with it in this region?
Thank you, Shira, and I'm glad to join the webinar, and I think you're raising a very important question. I think that to understand the current crisis of energy, we better take a look back 10 years ago to the previous energy crisis that hit this region, and this is the gas crisis of Egypt that happened in 2011 till 2012 or 13. At that time, both Israel and Jordan were shifting from dirty fuel, diesel and coal towards natural gas. And both countries were highly dependent on the gas coming from Egypt. And what happened is that in a very short period, the gas supply of Egypt was curtailed, and both Israel and Jordan were forced to shift not to natural gas, but to use diesel. The first effect was a huge increase in the cost of electricity in this region. And this had major other effects, like the balance of payments of the countries, and in Jordan, always the risk to the stability of the regime. Now, why am I raising this previous crisis that happened more than 10 years ago? But I think that it's highly affected the way both countries are looking at their energy strategy and the way they prepare themselves to the current situation. The main two lessons that were learned at the time is the first of all, that the country must diversify its resources in order to limit its dependence on one supplier or on one type of fuel. And the other lesson that was learned is the importance of renewables, because renewables will continue to be supplied, whether it is the sun or the wind, and they do not depend on politics or a curtailment of supply like the Egyptian gas crisis. And it's very interesting to see that the countries have learned the lessons, though only 10 years has passed in the previous time. And I think that Jordan is a very good example of learning lessons from such a crisis. First of all, Jordan diversified its gas supply. It gets in supply both from Israel, from Egypt, and from LNG, liquefied natural gas. Jordan is developing shale oil, and it has also very rapidly increased the share of renewables. It's already 20% in Jordan, and it's going to increase. The new targets are 50% in Jordan, which is a very impressive target. This means that at least if we focus on electricity, Jordan is less affected of the crisis in Europe, because it does not get gas supply from Europe or from Russia, and it does not depend on coal, and electricity is less dependent on the prices of oil. So as far as if we focus on electricity and not on transportation, Jordan is less affected. If we take a look at Israel, so Israel, since this gas crisis with Egypt, Israel now has the two gas reservoirs which are already functioning, Tamar and Leviathan, which supply all the needs of Israel. And the third one, Karish and Tanin, is under development and will be constructed soon. So Israel also does not depend on gas coming from Russia or from the rest of the world, which means that you are not affected by the gas prices in the global gas prices and the lack of gas and the increase of gas prices. The result is that Israel has long-term gas contract, and the prices of gas, which is 70% of the generation of electricity in Israel, are stable. Israel is currently more affected than Jordan this time because we produce 25% of our energy comes from coal, and the price of coal increased dramatically, which already increased the price of electricity in Israel and will continue to increase the price of Israel. There is going to be a decision very soon of increasing the price of electricity due to the price of coal. So I think that the learn of diversity was very rapidly learned and really supported the way the countries are meeting the new crisis. As for renewables, so both countries understood the importance of renewables, not only for climate change, but also for the security of supply. And it seems that Jordan was quicker than Israel in meeting higher targets. Part of that is that Jordan has a smaller demand for electricity, although the sizes of population is similar. So as a result, even though the capacity of renewable of Israel is larger, for Israel it's less than 10% of the generation, while for Jordan it is already more than 20. Because you need less capacity, it's a higher share of the generation of Jordan. Now, both countries have issues that are related to the development of renewables and are not connected to the current crisis in Ukraine. And these challenges are very different for each country. So for Jordan, the main issue, I believe, is the lack of demand. If you are a country with a small demand and you wish to develop a large share of solar energy, it means that very soon, in some part of the days, you will have excess generation because there is not much enough demand to use the energy generated by your power plants. If you want to have higher share of renewables, you will need storage in order to use the electricity at night or the other parts of the days. And the development of storage needs new investment and is also more expensive. So Jordan is facing available land and is developing its grid, and it can easily build new renewable power plants. But the issue is how do you meet the demand and the generation of the renewables which do not meet the same hours. So this is the issue for Jordan. For Israel, so there is enough demand, but the issues are different. Israel is smaller, and Israel is highly crowded. The population is growing very rapidly, and there are many constraints on building new renewable plants. So for Israel, there is not much potential of wind. There is no potential for hydro energy. The main potential for renewables is solar, and the main issue is where to find location to build this solar. Israel is solving this issue by using dual plans. It means that instead of just taking land and building solar plants on top of this land, and then the only use of the land will be solar, Israel is wishing to have dual use of the land. It means that if we have a road or an or a field of agriculture, we can build solar plants on top of this other use. For example, covering water reservoirs is a good example of this dual use. So Israel is now focusing on dual use in order to meet the constraint of the lack of land. The other issue for Israel is developing enough grid capacity to absorb all this new energy of renewable energy. And in Israel, due to this high density, this is also a huge challenge, being able to build all this grid to absorb the renewable energy. Now, the important part is that although Jordan has issues with renewable and Israel has issues with renewable, I highly agree with the ambassador that collaboration can really be a win-win situation for both sides. Because let's assume that Jordan builds more renewables and the energy is transmitted to Israel by a high voltage line, grid line. It means that this will solve the lack of demand for solar energy at Jordan, and it will help Israel find location for new renewables. So just by connecting the grid of the countries, both countries can benefit from additional renewable energy. It will enable Jordan to have more investment and to build more renewables, and it will provide additional supplies of renewables for Israel, which find it so difficult to find the locations. So this is a win-win situation that in the Abraham Accords is the first step towards that, but it's relatively small, only 600 megawatt compared to 16,000 megawatt that Israel will need to meet its target. But I think this is the first hint that we find for this collaboration. If this works, if this will be successful, we will see many projects like that will be fruitful for both sides.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gal. I know we have a speaker, Gideon Bromberg, who's going to speak about this in length and in the next panel. So there's a quick, I want to see if anyone raises their hands and has a question. There is a question coming from the audience, got straight to my email. I just want to ask you to speak about Jordan, Israel, very interesting. What's the potential for renewables in Egypt? Is this, I go to Sinai Peninsula, it's all basically desert. So if you can just comment on that. And maybe a final question. When we talk about renewables, there is one renewable option that we're not speaking about, that's nuclear energy. there's talk about a nuclear renaissance. If you hear Bill Gates speaking about the future of energy. So if you can just, but really briefly, because we do want to move to the next session, but if you can comment on these 2 points.
So the Sinai Desert is, of course, of affordable land and lots of sun. The point is connecting the grid. Since this is far away from the main demand of Israel, we will need a large development of the grid in order to bring this energy to the population location of Israel. I think this is the main challenge. Currently, there is no grid connection between Israel and Egypt, so building the grid is an issue. As for nuclear, I don't see nuclear being built in the area for several reasons. First of all, nuclear plants usually are baseload plants. It means that they generate their electricity 24/7. And in Israel, since we wish to have lots of solar energy, building nuclear plants will prevent the development of additional solar. It will create issue with the solar energy that we will have, because you cannot curtail the nuclear energy. And another one is the NPT, the lack of assignment of Israel of the NPT agreement. And I think this will affect the ability of building nuclear power plants in the area of Israel, at least. Another issue, of course, the high density of Israel, the effect of population, resistance to building, NIMBY, not in my backyard. So for this reason, I don't think that nuclear is the best next thing that we will see, at least in Israel.
Not in Israel, but we are seeing, of course, in the United Arab Emirates and other places in the region. And I know Jordan had plans for that, at least. So there was a talk about this. If anyone of I see that Ambassador Rowan would like to comment, and I invite all others to comment just briefly because we do want to move to the next session. Please, Ambassador Rowan.
Thank you so much. Just to comment on this last remarks, thank you so much, Dr. Nurit Gal. Egypt is very much invested in nuclear power. They are building a nuclear plant with the help of Russia for energy purposes, of course. And also I would like to mention, as I was saying, Egypt wishes and already investing effort in order to become a green hydrogen hub. So they will be able to produce and then to export this renewable energy. So these 2 things are already in the process in Egypt.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if there are any other, looking at the screen to see if there are any other virtual hands raised. There's another question for Dr. Gal. Are the technical challenges really Israel's main challenge, or is it the gas companies' hold on politics and finance the main obstacle? The history of fossil fuels points to the latter.
Yeah, I see the government highly committed to bringing more renewables to Israel. And the main challenge that I see now is the grid connection, the ability to connect these plants. I see a lot of commitment despite the use of gas. The policy of Israel is to have 70% gas, which is a lot since Israel is growing, and 30% for renewable, and there is room for both gas and renewables. The challenge is the grid and the lack of land.
Okay. And we have a question for Dr. Hanin Dov. Will President Herzog consider heading the delegation to the COP27 in Egypt?
I think we lost Dov.
Maybe Ambassador Bahar, maybe you can answer that as who will head the Israeli delegation to COP27? Is it going to be the president? Is it going to be Untitled?
Usually it is the prime minister. This is the level, but of course, president is also a possibility. We do not know.
And the prime minister will still be the foreign minister, or wait, elections are November 1. Well, we'll see. we need another session for Israeli politics, another webinar on that. So we have more questions, but in the interest of time, I would like to really thank you, Professor Price, Ambassador Bahar, and Dr. Gal for your excellent remarks. You really set the stage for the regional cooperations, which would be the topic of our next session. We have 4 speakers this time to address this. We'll start with Ms. Bar Rappaport, head of the Diplomatic Environmental Nexus Project at Mitvim. Mitvim is one of our partners in this program. It's a think tank dedicated to foreign policy issues. Mr. Gideon Bromberg, the Israeli Director of Eco-Peace Middle East. It's a unique organization that brings together Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli environmentalists to advance both sustainable regional development and sustainable peace. They've been doing this for 30 years, and Gideon will talk about their role in the deal that, the agreement that Dr. Gal referred to. Dr. Tarek Abu Hamid, who is the executive director of the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. It's an institute that houses academic program, research centers, and international cooperation initiatives, one of which was mentioned before with Oxford, the Track 2 initiative. It has a student body of Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and representatives from all around the world. I'm sorry, I just have to mention this, that Dr. Abu Hamid was previously the acting chief scientist of the state of Israel, the highest ranking Palestinian in the Israeli government. And really last but not least, we have Mr. Ari Ben-Dror, Associate Director of the Good Food Institute, the Israeli branch. So the Good Food Institute, GFI, is a science-based non-for-profit, it's not a profit company, for accelerating groundbreaking alternative protein research and innovation in Israel. And the goal is to address food security challenges that, as we've heard, this is a big challenge in the region. So let's begin actually with Bar. When we talk about regional cooperation, everyone mentioned it, and Ambassador Bahar gave us 2 examples of initiatives, but what paradigms exist when we talk about climate issues? What could be the contribution of multilateral climate forums in the MENA? And can they theoretically have an effect not only on the climate front, but also on regional politics and diplomacy?
Okay, so thank you, Shia, for your question, and I'm very happy to be here. I'll start by saying that there are lots of existing examples for regional forums and regional cooperations. We know the UFM, the Union for the Mediterranean, who promotes sustainable development and blue economy and cooperation in the civil society. There's the EMGF, the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, who was established by countries around issues of energy and natural gas. There's the Negev Summit, who started as one meeting, but becoming a type of a forum in the making. There's a regional cooperation led by researchers in the Red Sea, deals with corals preservations. And another interesting example is C40, which is a network, exclusive network of cities that are obligated to mitigation goals. And we have 3 members from our area, Amman, Dubai, and Tel Aviv, in this network. And when we examine and look on different forums, we can see that there are specific aspects that defines them. One aspect is who are the partners, the members of this forum. Is it civil society? Is it researchers, the business sectors, policy making, or maybe ministers in government? It can teach us about how formal is this forum and in what way the participant, the members, are obligated to the politics. Another issue is how strict is the forum. We can see forums that are just a space for dialogue, but no participant is obligated to each decision that the forum makes. In compared to forums in which if you don't stand in your obligations, so you can be excluded, like in C40. Another aspect is whether the forum deals with specific issue, like the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, who deals only with energy, or is the forum an umbrella for a wide spectrum of subjects. The UFM, for example, deals with tourism, health, agriculture, research, etc. In addition, we can discuss on different levels of potential cooperation that the forum supports in. In the most basic level, we can talk about help within climate emergencies like fires or floods. Another level can be around joint challenges, working together to find creative solutions in different subjects that we all face, like urban adaptation, food system. Another level can be a local commitment, national commitment to share goal, like mitigation goal and decrease of greenhouse gas emission. And I think in the highest level of cooperation and joint and work, we can talk about how to work together cross-border around specific issues. For example, having nature reserves that are cross-border, or planning regional systems of recycling. I'll say that we know that the area of the Middle East and North Africa is a very challenging one. in this aspect of creating, in this context of creating cooperations, because we have this very strong political logics of a strict border and strong nationality, and we have lots of conflict here in this area. But from the climate perspective, so we have completely different climate borders, not as less strict, because we are in this climate hotspot with a severe shortage of water and lack of resources. And then from the climate perspective, we must have cooperations. And we can also see that climate issues brings in new risk management, and they change the way political decision-making is made. It speeds up lots of political processes because it obligates cooperation. And it seems like it is easier to create political cooperations around climate issues, but still we can't run away from politics. So I think that the first role of a multilateral regional forum in our district to deal with climate changes is to find solutions that are both politically sustainable and environmentally sustainable. And we need regional forum to deal with climate change because, as been said before, lots of processes will be made faster and better and cheaper if we'll do it regionally. Water management, transition towards renewable energies, development of a circular economy. And in addition, we face so many big challenges like desertification and the rise of sea level, and it requires to combine the best minds and technologies. And I believe this cooperation is a key for us as a region for adaptation and mitigation, but also to survive. And it's important to say that there are lots of political advantage in this type of forums, because it creates this frame of long-term cooperation to face climate issues. It creates communications in places where there are no diplomatic relationship. It supports negotiation that in fields that are not necessarily around climate. And maybe it also will help in shaping a new regional identity and promote peace agreements. And when I do zoom into our story, so I think those forums for Israel are a way to expand normalization process and for the Palestinians to be empowered politically and to take part as a political entity in the regional conversation.
Thank you, Bar, and I appreciate you bringing the Palestinians on board. And I think you're right, there's enough low-hanging fruits that are both viable politically and environmentally, but the idea is how we pursue them. And we have two organizations here represented, EcoPeace, and there are vying to do, by the way, Gidon Bromberg and Professor Abu Hamid are both co-chairs of the subgroup on regional cooperation with me. They're doing exactly that. So I'll get back to you with another question, but let's move to Gidon. EcoPeace was really instrumental for all of us that know your work in the renewable energy desalinated water exchange between Israel and Jordan, which was announced in February last year. So can you briefly describe this deal, where it stands today in terms of implementation? And maybe we don't have a lot of time, but can you mention what other cross-border solutions EcoPeace is promoting?
So thank you, Shira, for the question, and to all the organizers for organizing this important event. I think I firstly want to speak to the vision that's needed, and several speakers have raised the issue that a regional vision is needed in order to obtain regional climate resilience. And at EcoPeace, we've tried to bring forth such a vision, and that's in a report that we released in 2020, calling for a green-blue deal for the Middle East. And we emphasize that it needs to be a regional vision that's Middle East wide, because the climate crisis doesn't just hit one particular country. It hits a region in a particular way. And therefore, to achieve resilience, the region as a whole needs to be working together to meet those challenges. And the Green-Blue Deal is a first effort to try and meet those challenges, to really turn the situation around from climate just being a threat multiplier, which clearly it is, but to climate also being an opportunity to promote cooperation and region-wide resilience, and in the process, without ignoring the political crisis at all, but on the contrary, in the proposals of the Green Blue Deal that Ecopieces are putting forward, also promote the two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians and regional integration region-wide. The Project Prosperity, which was signed in November of last year, is very much based on one of the pillars of the Green Blue Deal that Ecopiece had launched. And that pillar was actually based on the experience of Europe after World War II and the creation of the coal and steel community. Coal and steel were the two most important natural resources in the European continent at that time. And we asked the question, well, what are the most important natural resources facing or for the Levant at this time in the midst of a climate crisis? And we identified harnessing the sea on the one hand, with particular Israel's leadership in desalination technology, and on the other hand, harnessing the sun, given the development and the dramatic drop in prices, particularly of solar energy production. And our study and research highlighted that on the one hand, Jordan has the comparative advantage, as we heard from other speakers, because of its vast desert areas, to produce renewable energy, not only at price, which is extremely attractive compared to what we can produce in the Israeli and Palestinian markets, but also at scale, as was stated earlier, that we could only dream of. And on the other hand, Israel and Gaza on the Mediterranean coast enjoy proximity of the Mediterranean Sea to our populations, which means that we can desalinate at prices that are extremely attractive to our neighbors to the east, in this case, Jordan. And therefore, this deal, this declaration of intent has been signed based on sound economics, where Israelis and Jordanians can sell for the first time something of real value to the other. Jordan by advancing climate mitigation, and desalination on the Israeli coast by advancing climate adaptation and meeting the critical challenge of increased water insecurity because of the climate crisis. We're currently trying to move forward on a Israeli-Palestinian water energy exchange, and that is through the employment of the development of renewable energy in areas C of the West Bank, which are the open spaces, for the purposes by Palestinian investors, for the purpose of then wheeling that electricity, that solar electricity produced across Israel in cooperation with Israel in order to provide the electricity that's desperately needed, both to power the existing sewage treatment plants, sanitation issues, but also for the planned desalination facilities that the international community is trying to build in Gaza. We have a recent victory. For the first time in a decade, Palestinians are able to go out and swim in the beaches of Gaza. Similarly, Israelis just north of Gaza in Zikim and Ashkelon are enjoying cleaner beaches because of the building of sanitation facilities. Under the climate crisis, we really need to increase our efforts here. And a critical aspect of reaching regional resilience is indeed the needed additional electricity for the 2 million people, 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza, with regional benefits to Egypt, to Israel, and of course, to West Bank and Gaza itself. So we're excited about the potential of further cooperation that the climate crisis actually requires. And it brings home the message of urgency. The cooperation on these climate issues is not a privilege. No one is doing a favor. This is needed, as was stated earlier by, I think, by Dov, for our very survival. We claim to all love this land. Well, we're not going to have a land to love if we don't know, if we won't work out how to build on the cooperative arrangements that we see moving forward in order to build region-wide climate resilience and climate stability. Thank you, Shira.
Thank you, Gidon, and the framing of mutual interest is really the right one, the one that we need, and no one is doing anyone a favor. However, and you and Bar, those who spoke about it, the obstacles seem to be political, especially when we get to partnership with countries with which you don't have diplomatic relations, or it's a state of conflict and war, extremely complicated on the Palestinian front for a variety of reasons. Israel-Lebanon share a border, and we can talk about this. Iran is part of this region. You talk about it's not just Israel that has issues, Egypt, Turkey could potentially collaborate, and many other countries. So I think it's very interesting, and hopefully we'll have a moment to unpack these. But I do want to go to Professor Abu Hamid. You too, the Arava Institute, work across the region at a variety of levels to promote environmental and climate cooperation. So can you mention some of the key projects that are currently now in the works? And also, if you can touch upon the lessons that you have through the Track 2 partnership with Oxford on lessons learned from other regions and what can work here.
Thank you, Shira. مساء الخير للجميع. First of all, climate change is really a great catalyst for regional development and regional cooperation. There has never been a greater opportunity for positive change through regional cooperation. And we all believe that we can phase out of fossil fuels and scale up renewable energies in the region. So let's not waste any more time just talking about the regional cooperation and do that on the ground. And that's what the Arava Institute is doing. When it comes to the projects that we have on the ground with the Palestinians, also Jordanians, and we have also a lot of projects also in the Israeli Negev, as Shira mentioned, one of the key factors that can help us expand renewable energy resources, especially solar energy in the region that we live in, is the dual use of land, or what we call here harvesting the sun twice, to use agricultural land for both food production and electricity production. The Arava Institute was the first organization in the region to build such a pilot in the southern Arava. Agri-photovoltaics is dual use of land, producing energy on agricultural land and testing many crops under the shade of photovoltaic panels, investigating the impact of energy production on agriculture and the impact of agriculture on energy production. This project has been very successful. We are expanding that project into Morocco, the West Bank, and the Jordan Valley, and also there's a huge interest in the Gaza Strip. Another project that we conduct and project that we developed here at the Arava Institute, when we talk about climate change and how to adapt to climate change, people think only about the electricity sector, but the residential sector is also a major energy consumer and a major polluter. And one of the projects that we developed here is solar air heaters to utilize the sun to heat buildings during the winter. We have plenty of sun. Israel is one of the leading countries in the use of solar water heaters, but we do not utilize the sun to heat our buildings during the winter, even though we have plenty of sun in the winter in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. So this technology actually relies on heating air using solar energy, using the innovative evacuated tubes. This technology sucks the cold air from the building, heats it in these pipes, and sends it back to the building. This technology can save up to 50% of the energy consumption during the winter. One of the main reasons that we succeed to work with our Palestinian and Jordanian partners is the trust that we build with our partners on the ground. We have projects on the ground. We build the trust by bringing people together through our academic program, through our research centers. We have 4 months long program, 1/3 Palestinian, 1/3 actually Arab students, Palestinians, Jordanians, Israeli Arabs. We have also students from Gaza, students from Morocco, and we're looking forward to have students from Egypt. 1/3 Israeli Jewish students and 1/3 international students. These students come and live together. They study the environment together. They have dialogue programs. They share family experience. They share personal stories. And that's how you build trust between these communities. And once you build trust, all other aspects become just a technicality. We have several projects also inside Gaza Strip on drinking water systems. It's an Israeli technology that generates water from air. We managed to send into Gaza 3 systems like this. We got an approval from the civil administration in Israel to send another 5 systems like that. We managed to build a wastewater treatment plant in Gaza. Off the grid, runs on solar energy with the lithium-ion batteries that stores the energy, and the plant is functioning and running 24/7. It treats the wastewater in Abasan. It's near Khan Yunis in Gaza. The treated wastewater is used by farmers inside the Gaza Strip, by a group of women that they grow animal feed, and they generate incomes and jobs for the people there. When we do projects on the ground, we take the sustainability of the projects very seriously. It's not sending a product into Gaza. No, we train the people in Gaza on how to use, how to run, how to maintain these systems inside Gaza Strip. And we managed to bring into Israel 2 groups of engineers and technicians from Gaza Strip to Israel, to the Arava Institute, and train them on the water, energy, food nexus. We also have several projects in the West Bank on solar water pumping, solar desalination in the Jordan Valley, helping farmers continue doing farming. And that helps them what we call the Samud and staying in the Jordan Valley. We developed also an off-grid wastewater treatment. You know, the West Bank, most of the West Bank villages or suburbs are not connected to the sewage network. They have septic tanks. The wastewater goes to these septic tanks. They are not very well insulated, and the wastewater just infiltrates into the shared aquifer between Israel and Palestine. So it pollutes the shared water resources. So this technology helps these villages to treat their wastewater, and to the recycled water, the treated wastewater is used by these villagers for agricultural purposes. We started a new cooperation with Al-Akhawain University, also in Morocco, in using the Internet of Things for solar energy and agriculture, and also an agri-PV system in Gaza. And to say a few words about the work that we do with Oxford University.
Very briefly.
Yeah, Oxford University team was here last week. They managed to meet Minister of Energy, the Water Authority in Israel, in Palestine, and today they went into Jordan. They are developing a model that predicts or investigates the water, energy, food nexus in 2030 and 2050, taking into consideration the impact of the climate change and also the conflict that we have in the region. So they are developing scenarios, business as usual scenarios when there is a cooperation, and that connects that into economics of energy sectors, water sectors in the region that we live in. And please allow me to say the last few words in Arabic.
Because we have another speaker, we started late in Arabic.
كل عام وانتم بخير وجاء نزور موقعنا وبشرفنا انه نحصل على طلاب من الوطن العربي في معهد وادي عربي. شكرا جزيلا.
Shukran, Tarek. I think really interesting that we see here two NGOs that are working across borders. So if we connect this to what Bara was talking about, the different levels, at what levels, but at what level do you turn this into actual policy? You translate into the vision of officials, multilateral. Clearly, so much can be done, and so much you're doing so much already. But think about it, if we can take it to the next level, if it comes to official positions of countries over, and it just, I think, just teases the appetite of what can happen here in this region. I also really appreciate both Gidon and Tariq, you spoke about Gaza. We talk about Egypt and Israel, definitely lots of shared security interests, Gaza being one of them. And both countries, and I think Israel is very appreciative of Egyptians' active efforts, leadership, and stabilizing the situation in Gaza. And Gaza will not be stabilized. Will not be stabilized unless we also solve these issues. I'm not saying this is the only reason, but it's definitely one of the conditions. Definitely not a sufficient one. We did start late, so we're running a little bit over time. But I hope you stay with us for our last but not least speaker, Ari from GFI. You know, food security. The official definition we talk about it's right. It's when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods that also meets their preferences and dietary needs. Now, if we do look at the MENA, all elements are challenged, really. There's insufficient supply of food, the diets are not diversified, prices are high. Can you tell us a little bit what GFI and GFI Israel specifically is doing to advance food security? What if regional cooperation is befitting in the field of food security? And also, how do alternate proteins really, when you think of it as a sort of a luxury product, but how can it help in our region?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Ari Ben-Jor. I'm Associate Director for GFI Israel. I'll try to keep this quick, but those are many questions. So as everyone knows, our global food system is fragile and prone to disruption. So historically, rising food prices and sudden scarcity have led to destabilizing riots from the French Revolution to the Arab Spring. And they've played a disastrous role in recent civil wars in Sudan, Yemen, and Syria. The COVID-19 pandemic sent another 150 million into extreme poverty globally. And on February, with the invasion of Ukraine, that disrupted substantial agriculture exports, sending shockwaves through the global grain trade. So Ukraine's exports alone feed 400 million people each year. And along with Russia, they supply half the cereal supply to Lebanon and Tunisia, and 2/3 of cereal supply for Libya and Egypt. Now, after just 100 days of war, the world found itself scrambling to fill a 46 million metric ton gap in the global grain trade. But when considering food security, there's a much bigger global problem than the Russian invasion. The most under-discussed contributing factor is the volume of crops that is currently used as animal feed. So the World Economic Forum detailed that more than half of cereals, wheat, corn, barley, grown in Ukraine are not intended for human consumption, but rather for animals. And globally, we're talking about 968 million metric tons in 2019. That's enough to solve the Ukrainian grain shortage almost 20 times over. The vast majority of the calories consumed by a chicken, pig, or cow are used to keep the animal alive. So animals require far more calories of input than they ultimately provide to humans. According to the World Resources Institute, loss percentages are 800% for chickens, with 9 calories in for 1 calorie back out. And chickens are the most efficient animals at turning crops into meat. For cattle, the least efficient one, we're talking about a 3,900% waste of calories being fed to a cow compared with those we obtain from it. Animals as a whole consume 1/3 of all staple crop calories produced globally, but they deliver only 4% of the total calories to humans in the form of meat, eggs, or dairy. So if land and grain requirements for animal agriculture increase by 70 to 100% by 2050, as predicted by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, what's already a dire situation will really become a catastrophe of increased malnutrition and starvation. So in short, while we need to produce more food using less land, trends in consumption will demand we produce less food using more land. However, we do take great hope in recent scientific advancements focused on making meat from plants and cultivating actual meat directly from animal cells. So let's talk about alternative proteins. By reducing the volume of crops used for animal agriculture, the global community can lower crop prices, increase availability in vulnerable areas, reduce reliance on imported food, and protect against the negative effects of climate change on the global food system. Today's plant-based alternatives to conventional beef use 90 to 99% less land than their conventional counterparts. And a life cycle assessment of cultivated beef, so that's beef produced in a lab, found that it could require 93% fewer calories and 95% less land than conventional beef. And these numbers are only going to improve over time with efficiency-focused R&D. Just as the goal with renewable energy and electric vehicles is to make them interchangeable with conventional energy, plant-based and cultivated meat focused on winning in the marketplace by producing products that taste the same or better to consumers and that cost the same or less, thus requiring no intentional behavior change. Now, unlike proposals to limit consumption levels or reduce population or economic growth, a switch to alternative proteins promises to produce more food per person at greater profit to producers with far fewer consequences for food insecurity, climate, or public health. Governments in Israel, Japan, Germany, India, Singapore, Canada, and the Netherlands have all invested in alt protein R&D, recognizing the opportunity to lead in this emerging field. And China has also been quietly allocating significant funding to help the sector scale up since at least 2020. So who can play a role in this critical transformation of the world's protein supply? Farmers can play a leading role in this next chapter if the infrastructure and support system all around them evolves to incentivize and accelerate the transition from feed crops to food crops. Companies can play a leading role if they seize the cost-saving efficiencies of alt proteins and if they practice ESG-driven decision-making across their operations and supply chains. Lastly, the world's governments can play a leading role if they fund critical R&D to advance the science and scaling of alt proteins and level the playing field for them. And I'll end with a couple of words on collaborations we can gain from here in the Middle East. So Israel is a world leader in the R&D of alt proteins, second really only to the US in both the number of companies in the field and the amount of capital raised. So we can export both the knowledge and the production that is going to take place in Israel to our neighboring countries in the Middle East. And this presentation is too short now to detail really the solutions, but I'll just mention they could entail reducing trade barriers to maintain open trade policies, mitigating fertilizer shortages, sharing knowledge through joint R&D centers, and a few more things that we are currently working on. So if you'd like to learn more, you can join us at our pavilion at COP27, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ari, and I apologize. Our time is over. I think that's what happens when you have such great experts and many of them, but I hope this is one program out of many which we will have before COP27 and after, because if this problem is not going anywhere. I want to first thank our speakers again, Tamir, Amira, Dov, Colin, Gidon, Norit, Bar, Gidon too, Tarek, and Ari. Also, I want to thank our partners at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their partnership, the Mitvim Institute and the Israeli Climate Forum, as well as my colleagues at INSS, Dr. Ophir Winter, our Egypt researcher, and Ben Yerushalmi, without whom this program would not be possible. Thank you all for joining us. Eid al-Adha Mubarak, Shukran Kthir. See you in Sharm, if not before. Thank you.